Welcome to another episode of Destination Linux podcast.
Hi, I'm Rocco, and this is episode 24 of Destination Linux. So this week is a little bit different because Rob is off. He had some business to take care of, so he wasn't able to make it. And the decision was to skip a week or to have a co-host. So put out the feelers, talk to a couple guys, and I have two awesome guys with me today to help me run through the podcast with you. So I have Dustin and Ryan. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, so I'm sure everybody's going to want to know, well, some of them may already know you. I'm sure, Das, Ryan, you're affectionately known as DasGeek from the YouTube channel. And Dustin, you are from...
Ubuntu Budgie is kind of where I've been working these days.
Nice. So, where did you or when did you start in Linux?
Well, first hands-on, I guess, would have been probably about 97, Red Hat 5. It was, I was already working in IT at the time, more of like a Windows guy, which I think everybody was around then. And I just had a manager who was all
Windows? Did you say Windows?
Shh.
Anyway, go ahead.
I deny it all. Mm-hmm. And basically, I had a manager who just kind of told me he was monkeying around with it. And so that just kind of made me, we had some spare PCs and stuff. And I just kind of started spinning up Red Hat 5. And then I got pretty sidetracked with it, mostly because I was having to like compile audio drivers just to get stupid speakers to work. And so for me back then, it was mostly more of like kind of dipping my toes in and, you know, I wouldn't say like I was all in at that point, you know, I had to kind of become a convert at some point. It was all like spare gear, you know, never really ran it as a primary for quite a while. But then probably around 2000, is kind of when I made that jump in, at least on the server side. So Linux, probably real heavy use has been since about 2000 in a like kind of production environments and things like that. So I have an infrastructure background, and that's kind of where my inroads with it were. So it wasn't actually a lot of desktop at the beginning, and that was more because I still had to support Windows, various incarnations, like all the way back 3.1.1, Windows 95, Windows NT, went through some, you know, Active Directory migrations, all that kind of stuff. So I still had to support it. It was a lot of mixed mode networks kind of thing. And then over the years, once I kind of got to that point where I didn't really have to support it anymore, I started distancing myself. My role kind of switched into like security, and now it's actually management. So I don't have to support anything anymore. So now even like my work machines, they're all Linux and Amazonified EC2 instances that I run my desktop out of and stuff like that. So it, you know, it's much more prevalent now. And, you know, I made my way through, I guess, desktops. I came back on around 10.04. I don't remember what the code name for that in Ubuntu land was, but that would have been around that time. And then I was on Arch with i3 for a desktop for quite a while. I actually am a pretty big fan of i3. I just like, I don't like touching my mouse. So window management was always key for me. And then I ended up on Antergos and i3 for a while. And then eventually Ubuntu Budgie when I actually joined that team. So that is where I sit now for obvious reasons.
Right. Well, I don't think anybody switches to Linux altogether right out. It's always you get your feet wet, you start out, and you just go a little bit here, a little bit there until you finally realize, hey, this is better for me. So
yeah, well, it was always dipping toes until it would fit my workflow, I guess. And there were certain things that either annoyed me or didn't quite fit in with what I was doing at the time. You know, again, mixed mode, so you have a lot of Windows admin stuff and you know, oh, you have to run Outlook, you have to run it, you know. And at the time, you know, there was no like OWA and stuff for the corporate environments and things like that. Now it doesn't really matter because everything's in a web browser anyways. So
right
now I don't have to, therefore I do not.
So you're very active in the community. You're active in the Telegram groups, and you went to LinuxFest Northwest. So how was that?
It was awesome. It was kind of my first sort of go at these fests. I live like an hour north of it, and I find it completely ridiculous that it took me this long to go. It was sort of one of those things where, like, in amongst my friends, like, none of my friends are sort of like this, and I've never really been much of a lone wolf to roll down to something like that. So I'm like, all right, I'll go.
Right.
I never went. And then this year it was because I started getting involved in open source like in like December of last year. I just decided I didn't want to just consume it all the time. I wanted to sort of help out and become part of it. And so through that stuff and talking to various people, like I started talking to Martin Wimpress from Ubuntu Mate, and he was coming in. So I wanted to head down and meet him because he was very gracious with information online and stuff like that. So I wanted to head down and meet him. Ryan Sipes, he's the System 76 community manager. And honestly, kind of a lot of what I'm saying here, sort of echoing even what I wrote in a blog post about it. But it's just, that's the kind of impression I had. It was the people. The people were awesome. Like everyone, every single person that I spent time with, and all kinds of like crazy different sort of discussions that some had absolutely nothing to do with anything Linux. And
right.
I actually like that. And all walks of life. Like it was pretty cool. Like there was, like the traditional gray neck beard kind of dudes. And there was, the quite the opposite of that. And it was such a wide spread of people. And it was that is what I liked about it, was more the people. I mean, the displays were cool, and it was kind of neat to see like kind of the last episode, one of the other podcasts, and, stuff like that. And it was fun. It was a good exposure. And I will definitely be going every year, whether I go by myself or not again.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome to go to.
Yeah.
I'm not close to it, and I wouldn't go to it, but I think that would be awesome to go to. Just to meet the people. We talk, we'll talk on Telegram, we'll talk online, but to actually meet, talk in person, that would be absolutely awesome.
Oh, it's very different. Like you get to, I mean, I'm not going to say you get to know people in that short amount of time. I mean, for me, unfortunately, I had prior commitments where I had to come back up every night. So I didn't get to kind of hang out. And there was a lot of like after festivities that like System 76 were putting on. And I think that's when you probably would have seen like even another side of people, just based on some of the photos I saw. But it's one of those events that if you can go, you should definitely go. I remember reading, I think it's off of their website, that they actually said it's the biggest fest in the US. So, yeah.
Ryan, do you ever go to the LinuxFest Northwest?
I haven't been to LinuxFest Northwest. No, I would love to go. Closest thing I've been to that would be Dragon Con. That's just because I'm a geek. But I guarantee you a bunch of people there at Dragon Con used Linux, because they just, you could tell that it was our people. But no, I've not gone. I would love to go. And I think probably someone like me who's a lot newer in Linux could learn a lot.
All right. So when did you start in Linux, Ryan?
An interesting past with Linux. So there have been portions where I've touched Linux or seen it cross my desk. My dad owned a computer store in Florida and wrote software, and we built and engineered computers, things like that. And every once in a while, we would get some computers from businesses that would have Red Hat or things on it. I never messed with those operating systems. When I'd boot it up, I'd look at it and go, oh, God, what is this? We're going back to DOS. But that was kind of the first impression there. And then later in life, there were instances where I was doing data recovery for individuals, and tools like DD Rescue and things were incredibly powerful. And I was able to do some amazing things, like being able to get a particular friend of a friend's baby's first photos rescued off a hard drive that every other tech store and place that she had sent it off to special hard drive recovery could not get the data off of it. But we were able to use DD Rescue and get that data along with some other tools that I found. But at that point, I was really just reading what others had done and copying it and seeing if it worked. I didn't really know what I was touching too much. And then I decided to do the 30 days of Linux. And that's where the first time, which was just a few months ago, that I said, what if I went into Linux and really put my entire portfolio of PCs, and I have a lot of them, on Linux, and just tried to use it full time. Could it actually replace everything that I do in Windows? And that was the test. And one of the big keys to me is every video I had watched up to that point was all about Linux can take an old computer and make it new again. But I didn't care about that. I wanted to take the best computer that I could afford and see what Linux could do. And that's where I think 30 Days of Linux became a success on my channel, and everything else is because it was a different flavor than most people I had seen trialed Linux. We put it on the 1080, which was brand new at the time, NVMe, M2 hard drive. We did 32 gigabytes of DDR4. Like, we maxed the machine out and then put Linux on it and gamed and did graphic design and Kdenlive. And we brought my brother up who knew nothing about Linux and said, hey, write your game in Blender and Torque and see if you can use Linux. And we just did all of these advanced things with Linux instead of what a lot of people see, which is like, oh, this, look, it's got a notepad and you got LibreOffice, and, which that's great. All that stuff is necessary, but we wanted to see power user implementations. And so that was when I really got into it, but I'd never intended to stay with Linux. I kept my hard drive, my Windows hard drive there. I was ready to boot back into it. And then, kind of like Dustin said about the community, they're infectious. It's like they start talking to you and they care and they want to help you. And they're like, hey, what programs, like they're reaching out to me, like, what programs do you find that you can't replace? And I'm like, OneNote. I love OneNote. Okay, try CherryNote. And they were giving me all of these different things. And it's like they really wanted me to stay with Linux. I could feel it. And then I started getting all these people like, hey, I'm switching with you. So it became this phenomenon, and it still is. If you go on my channel and read the comments on most of my videos, even ones aren't related to Linux, you'll see, hey, I saw your 30 Days of Linux and I'm switching today. Or I had tried Linux in the past and saw your videos and I'm switching today. And that, to me, has kind of been my Linux world. It really started just a few months ago, which is kind of cool. And
that is awesome. Well, your 30 Days of Linux challenge was a very popular series, although you did get some heat for that as well.
Lots of heat for that. There were a lot of instances where YouTube kind of got me bad when we were talking about removing annotations, because I really wanted the experience, and this was probably dumb on my part. I really wanted the experience to be raw. So when I would record a video for Linux, like saying, hey, I'm going to go try Doom, or in the case of the video that everyone talks about, which is I wanted to try, what was the game? I'm trying to think here. It's the undersea game, BioShock.
Yeah.
And I recorded it raw. Well, there's this issue with OBS and Linux Mint, where OBS Linux Mint will tear through. So I'm in the video going, this is great. There's no screen tearing. Everything's running wonderful. But there's just this one section at the very beginning of the video, and it's not more than like 3 seconds long, where you see the screen tearing of Mint coming through, and it's OBS, but it's not on my screen while I'm gaming. And I put a little annotation there. Of course, YouTube removed those, so now you can't see that on the video. So now all the comments are, oh yeah, the game's real great, and Linux, and you can see all this tearing. And there's all these other videos I've done with Doom 2016 using Vulkan drivers and everything else that just, 140 frames per second, the game scream. It's amazing, but unfortunately, sometimes I think I do a disservice with that video. But the reality is, I think the people who are not going to switch to Linux are going to find a reason anyways. They're just coming to troll. And the ones who are really interested, you can see there's more comments of people saying, I'm switching to Linux, or you convinced me to switch, even in that video there. So I think a lot of people saw through that or kind of understood it. But I did pin a comment. That's the best I could do to say at the beginning. But there are a lot of people in Linux who know a lot more than me, and they will let me know that on a regular basis. But the way I look at it is the people who know the most, they're the ones coming in there to help me. The ones who read articles, I call, Google smart. They're the ones that come in there and they just look for any little slip up or thing you say, and then they beat you up over it. Whereas the ones who really know what they're doing, they're the ones that come in and try to educate you. And that's what my channel is about. It's why every video ends with fill your brains. It's not about me teaching you everything. It's about us as a community teaching each other. And that's what I try.
Well, the reality is no one knows everything. And if everyone says they know everything, they're a liar.
Yeah,
pretty
It's
much
that simple. Like it's, like I regularly suffer, as a lot of people do, with what's called imposter syndrome, right? You're out there kind of doing your thing, and then there's always going to be someone smarter, and then you're always like, should I really be doing this? And the reality is yeah, you should be, because one, that's the only way you're going to learn. And the reality is no one can fault you for that. And the real important part is you actually have to say when you don't know what you're talking about. Don't sort of pretend that you know what you're doing. If you don't, there's nothing wrong with not knowing, because there's a lot I do not know, and I will be the first to admit that.
Well, that's
Really,
one of the good things about, Ryan, your channel, is that it's real, that it's not fake. It's not somebody out there trying to say, I know it all. It's just real experiences. And you have over 2,000 subscribers. So you have obviously you have a fan base and a really good channel. So
thank you very much. Yeah, it's grown very fast. Thanks to Linux, really. And you were one of the ones who came in to help me out when I was tortured in the comments, and we didn't know each other back then at all. But you were one of the kind ones that would come in and give encouragement, and there were a lot of people like you, and that's the beauty of the Linux community. And I would say that's easily 99% of the community. And I can honestly say I'm a part of a lot of geek communities in my life. Obviously, I go to DragonCon, right? There is a rarity in the Linux community that you can say 99% of the people truly love this product. They love the ideas behind it. They love the people, watching people get involved in it. And that's really what this channel was a bunch of people pushing me up. And that's what's so cool about it, is that's what drove them, is to get this new guy who's very geeky into other stuff into Linux, and to kind of share that common, love.
Is that kind of what, would you say that's when kind of there was a spike in your channel? Is that sort of what drove it? Or how would you sort of lay out what your numbers were like, say, pre and post your 30-day challenge?
I mean, 30-day Linux really was a huge boost. It probably made up 20 to 30% of my viewers. Up to that point, I was growing very quickly, but it was more on audiophile, stuff and security. Everybody, that's kind of what led my channel into like, hey, I'm going to try this 30 days of Linux, was everybody was asking about privacy and security. And so I would do videos on Wannix and Tails and things like this, just the security aspects of it. But I didn't really know a whole lot of, what I was talking about outside of just security implementations, and why, say, a Linux registry would be, or kernel would be more secure than Windows, for instance. But there was a lot of security things, keeping yourself safe, that stuff online, and that started blowing up. But that naturally led to Linux, I think, because when you think security, you're going to start curving right towards Linux. So, I mean, it kind of led there itself. And during that time, because people were so interested in security and I was doing a lot of videos on it, I started researching it and realizing how insecure things like Windows really were, and what they were doing behind the scenes, which I would say I was kind of ignorant to, or just didn't care enough about at the time to really explore prior to that.
I have to disagree with you, Ryan, because they have a new system out now, Windows S. It stands for Windows Security.
It's so secure because you can't install anything on it, which
Pretty
was a brilliant workaround.
I have a different word for S.
Yeah, well, we won't use that here. Okay, so two guys going to help me out with the news. So first up in our news section is Ubuntu 17.10. So the daily builds have been coming out, and it is now shipping with the Gnome desktop instead of Unity. So the Gnome...
Shocker.
Yeah, the Gnome desktop is now the default. And it's come on pretty quickly. Like originally, I didn't think they were going to switch so fast. I thought they would wait, but it's come on pretty quickly. So LightDM has Gnome as the default in the ISO, but there's also a Gnome Wayland session.
So there's one other change though. I think I read this today. I think they dropped LightDM and now they're going to GDM.
And they will be, yes, because they had announced, I think it was OMG Ubuntu had an article about it. GDM is going to replace LightDM. Right. But now, is that on, did you look at the daily builds? Is that with that now? Is GDM in there? Or is it still LightDM?
I'm pretty sure it's still LightDM. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't downloaded like the main distro in kind of a while right now.
I haven't either, man. So the Unity session is gone apparently and now I haven't downloaded it, but according to everything that I have read, the Unity session has been removed. And again, GDM will be replacing LightDM. So that release date is October 19th. Now, is that something you guys are going to check out or try, or are you just going to let it go?
Well, that's a tough one for me for obvious reasons. There's a certain amount of
loyalty there.
Limited. Well, no. It's not even a loyalty. I actually like to load other stuff on just to see what's happening. Like I have a test rig that has Solus on it. Like that's, but I have that one because it's a little more relevant to sort of what I'm working on right now. If I had more equipment, I'd probably have more experiments happening, but limited computers, time, all that other kind of stuff. I haven't branched out a lot lately. I've sort of been waiting to see how it's going to settle up with the Gnome implementation, because there's been a lot of discussion about, is it stock? Is it not stock? How are they going to change it? And then there's, the questions of how many extensions, is it going to weigh it down? It depends who you ask about it. So I'm kind of waiting to see where it sort of settles a bit. And then to be honest, I will pull it down because you want to kind of see what's happening and keep yourself connected. It's just, my current use case is I'm not going to jump all over it day one. I'll get there. I will do it, for sure. But just not on day one for myself. I just, let the dust settle and see where it's going to go. But I am interested in it because this is a pretty major transition from where they've been and, kind of where they're going to. And it is interesting. And I'm also curious to see sort of how the teams lay out, like what sort of the split is between the work that Canonical itself is doing and the previous Ubuntu Gnome devs are. Like, are they being pulled into the fold? Is it just a core team there? Like how that's going to settle out. Yeah, well, I mean, I know there's some meetings and stuff going on for it. Like you can sort of see some buzz about it going on in some of the Telegram groups and things like that. But I'm just kind of, for me, more of what's interesting is to see kind of how the dust settles and what it's going to look like and what their plan is going forward. That's my interest point more than anything. I mean, software changes so fast that, just when the moment something changes, I don't jump at it. I look at it, but I'm not going to start loading and wiping machines until I sort of see where it's going to be, not what it's building to be.
So you're not a distro hopper?
Not right now. I'm maybe a closet distro hopper. I just don't distro hop on my
go hide in the closet and install me.
Pretty much. No, I don't. I think
we coined a new term.
Exactly. I don't distro hop on my main machine because I got stuff to do.
Right.
But to that being said, I mean, for example, my daughter's laptop, it's running Ubuntu Mate and has been for a long time. I put her on that one. And so she's got that one. My son was running, he was running stock Unity or Ubuntu with Unity for quite a while. And so that's kind of how I guess I experienced my distro hopping, is kind of through either my one test unit and my kids.
Right.
Because I gave them a laptop and it only had one thing on it because I don't have licenses for anything else.
Ryan, how about you? You going to try the daily builds? Are you going to wait to the release, or are you just even going to not even try it?
I definitely will try it. I have a soft spot in my heart and always will be for Ubuntu. And the reason is, as a new user to Linux, Ubuntu installs every time. It has the best installer. It's flawless. I can go and, all the distros people were telling me to try in 30 days of Linux. I would always be screwing up my computer in horrible ways. And Ubuntu could always boot and fix it. Like Ubuntu would always install and fix my problems. So I have a lot of love for that. And I think a lot of new people start with Ubuntu, and obviously a lot of experienced people stay with it. But most of your new people probably have some starting point with Ubuntu. And so I'd love to see them trying this. There is this, I would say, small group of people who have this thing against Ubuntu where it's like, oh, don't use that. You've got to use this other distro. And I don't say that's a big group because, but I think a lot of them are going to be quenched with this Gnome move is where I'm getting at. Like, I think that group may be appeased knowing that they're going to Gnome and moving away from the Unity side of things. So I'm very interested to see how it looks, how it works. And hopefully it's not like Ubuntu Mate fork where you can not search for, I don't know what menu system they're going to implement, but not search for applications, Rocco.
You're talking about
I don't get it.
Yeah, you're talking about the 3-tiered menu, yeah. Well, look, there's a lot of development, and we had talked earlier about the fact that how GNOME was going to look with extensions, which ones were they going to implement. There was polls out there on OMG Ubuntu, but there's what is exciting about it is it's like a flurry of activity with GNOME where people are, the news stories that have been coming out with this extension. Oh, now there's a picture-in-picture extension. Now there's this extension. There's just a flurry of activity around GNOME, and it's exciting to see because you're getting all of this development and that you didn't have before. You had it. Always had extensions, and that's what makes GNOME great. But now you have just a constant flow of development, and I think it's awesome.
But how much of that is new hotness?
Well, to me, it may be partially new hotness, but if it develops into having better extensions or new extensions, so be it.
I'm actually not even advocating that that's what it is. I think there's probably a small aspect of that, at least in the more driven from the interest, I think. But I'm not necessarily advocating that that's why everybody's starting to now write extensions or whatever.
I think that's a part.
Yeah, well, it makes it appealing because you're targeting a larger audience now, right? Because if you look at everywhere that GNOME comes by default, like that's a pretty big footprint. And, no pun intended with their icon either. But it is everywhere. So if you're going to kind of write code and kind of have it, a wider touch and feel, that's definitely one of the targets for sure. So, well,
again, there's a flurry of activity. So they're working on improving the HiDPI support. So it already works. Yeah, well, it already works somewhat with HiDPI. Although I don't have a HiDPI screen, it does work with HiDPI. It just doesn't work perfectly.
Great.
So they are working on improving that. There's also GNOME 3.26 will be coming out, and that will have some changes in it. So there will be, the top bar will be translucent by default. And I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I always want a transparent panel. I just think that makes the operating system look fabulous. And it's going to be by default, although you can turn it opaque if you want to. And it will turn opaque when you maximize a window. But to start out, when in windowed mode, it will be transparent. What do you think?
For me personally, it just depends on the overall theme. Sometimes I like a solid one, like it's like that stark contrast to whatever your wallpaper is. But for example, right now, I am running a semi-transparent panel in Budgie. So today I have that, tomorrow I might have something else, but that's the beauty of it, So Any default setting, while it can be a first impression thing, the reality is the flexibility is there to kind of make it do whatever you want it to do. And that, I would say, is probably one of the driving factors for a lot of people to kind of using desktop Linux day to day, like outside of the tech people anyways, right? Like tech people are going to use it because of the larger technical merit through all aspects of the system. But, someone who's maybe come into the ecosystem and their primary use case is, web browsers and Netflix and whatever else that kind of thing is, they're going to kind of, they like the eye candy. And I think everyone does, whether they'll admit it or not, but you'll that kind of flexibility is something a lot of people tend to like.
Well, some people will some people like the eye candy, and I'm one of those people. Some people don't really care about the eye candy and just want it to work. So either way, I think it's a good thing that they're going by default with the translucent panel, because it is a first impression. So when you and this isn't going to be necessarily, I don't know when 3.26 will actually hit Ubuntu, but it is coming. So Ryan, do you care for a transparent panel?
Like Dustin, I don't really care one way or the other. It depends on the themes that I have and what I'm running. It's not something I particularly pay a lot of attention to. With that being said, I love the fact that they're giving you the option, just like Dustin said, and I would think that they've done some type of polling or something of their community to feel like they would want that standardized, or maybe they just feel it looks better with the implementations that they have. But as long as you have the options there, then it's only a good thing.
The other thing is too, though, is like it's so subjective to personal taste, right? Like it's kind of like picking a t-shirt. I might like a black one, you might like a white one. So, I mean, I think the bigger thing is more than the details. I mean, you got to have something that looks good out of the box, but it's having a sane set of defaults is something that I look for. Something that you can, install a system, boot it up the first time, and there isn't necessarily that overwhelming urge to go and tear it apart and change it, because you look at it and just kind of like, oh, what have I done? Like, what am I looking at here? Like, like in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, any machine that you can turn on out of the box and start using it without having to customize it is a win in my opinion. You don't want to have to customize it, but you want to be able to customize it when, it strikes your fancy or whatever you're feeling that day.
I have to agree that out-of-the-box experience is especially important for distro hoppers, because do we really have the time before we go to the next distro to change any of the settings in there?
Well, that's why I think it's a great thing to have it by default, because you can get a transparent panel in Gnome through extensions. But to have it by default, it would be awesome. And if I had my Chris Fisher bell right now, I would ding it for Ubuntu Budgie, and we'll plug them, because Budgie has some of the best sane defaults there is out there. When I boot into Ubuntu Budgie, I don't really have to change hardly anything, with the exception of the menu. I'll leave that in there. But for everything else, I don't have to change anything, really. I mean, the system tray icons, everything, the plank dock, everything is, to me, where it should be. Now, that may be my personal taste, but it does have some sane defaults.
So my question to you then is like, okay, when you run Solus, do you feel the same way? Because, I mean, it's Budgie too. It is. But Solus has the specific repos that they have, and they don't have the wide variety of software as of yet. So no. I'm talking about the same defaults and how it looks, because you were talking about sort of like how it looks and how it is out of there, like the icons in the menu and everything. But not the menu in the tray. You don't like the menu.
I don't really care for the menu.
Because what I'm getting at is, because like Solus has great defaults out of the box too, right? Yep. So you can't. I'm just nod to Ike and crew, because they do a great job, and to a certain degree we inherit some of that, and that's awesome. And I was just curious on your point of view, like whether it's something that you felt was different between the two, and not necessarily in like a competitive manner. I'm just curious, genuinely.
Well, to be honest with you, I have installed Solus Budgie, and I actually installed Gnome over top of Budgie, and I installed Solus Mate. So it's not that I installed it over top of it. I installed it alongside of it, I should say. So okay. I really didn't run Solus Budgie that long to get a good look at it. I went right to Solus Mate. I actually did videos on that, and then I went to Solus Gnome. So it was kind of like I didn't give Solus Budgie maybe the time that it should have had. But
you should. I'm definitely going to say you are definitely not the closet hopper or closet distro hopper.
I'm out in the open, dude.
Out and proud.
I'm out in the open. All right, so next on our list is more news about Gnome, and you have Dash2Dock, which got an update to version 59. So it has better multi-monitor support, And Dash-to-Dock is like one of the premier extensions out there. I mean, there are some people that will prefer Dash-to-Panel just the way it's set up. But I think Dash-to-Dock is like the premier extension that you can use in Gnome. And now you can check a box to show on all monitors so that you can have the Dash-to-Dock on both monitors.
Yeah, that's kind of the one extension that everyone just sort of goes to. Like anytime you hear anyone recommend any specific Gnome extension, that's usually like 1, 2, or 3 in the list. With this update, do they allow you to have separate docks on different monitors, or is it all just kind of like a mirrored sort of replication across all of them?
I don't know for sure, but as far as everything that I read, it replicates the same dock on both monitors. So
okay.
I don't want to say it's definitely not an option, but I don't think it's an option. So
I don't think it is either. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. I was just more curious if you had heard one way or the other for sure.
So you have a setting to change the behavior of the icons as well, which I thought was pretty neat. So, when you click on the icon right now, before that update, you would switch between, like if you had 2 Chrome windows open, you would switch between the 2. But you can actually switch it in there so that you can click on the icon that you're looking for and it will bring up the overview, which is a really nice feature.
That's actually pretty cool.
So, Ryan, have you installed Gnome? Have you run it?
I've not played with it directly or in any way at the time that I was downloading the distros and playing with them that I would have known I was playing with it specifically. Just because of my knowledge at the time when I was hopping a lot during the 30 days of Linux was, they would go, hey, try Linux Mint or try this distro, try that distro.
Right.
And I'd just download the first one on there, not knowing much about desktop environments at the time. So, no, I haven't spent a whole lot of time, to my knowledge.
I got a distro for you that's not a distro.
Yeah.
What's that?
Have you Googled Linux from scratch?
No. It sounds like it wouldn't be up my alley, though.
It's literally like a cookbook that gets you down, like I believe, like compiling your kernel and everything, and you build up everything step by step. I've heard a lot of people say that if you really want to understand the internals, you do Linux from scratch.
Yep.
Wow.
I have not done it in a long time. I don't know if I want to do it again.
Oh, it wasn't fun, huh?
Well, it's good. It's interesting. It's like one of those little tiny virtual blue ribbons on your cork board that's kind of
your
like,
geek
all right,
card.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things you look at until you kind of do. You're like, I should do it. Not again.
Yeah. Well, we talked about it before. You have to have the time in order to do that. It's not just a sit down 10-minute process. You have to have the time to learn it and pick it up and get it right. And there's going to be problems, and you're going to have to research them, and you're going to have to ask for help. So you have to have time to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So
it's a good learning thing, though.
Yeah, it is. So the next thing we have is another Gnome issue or article. We have another extension, picture-in-picture. So when you install this extension, it pretty much, I don't know if you've ever used Floating for YouTube Chrome extension, but it's pretty much similar to that, where you would open a window, say you wanted to open a video, and you install the extension, you hit the drop-down menu, and you set the preview to on, and you tell it what window you want it to preview. And then it puts maybe a 4x4 screen of that video or whatever you chose in either your top right or your bottom left corner. So you can continue to browse what you're doing, look through your open windows, move files around, doing whatever you're doing, and still see that window, whether it be a video or even a website.
Oh,
this is like so up my alley. I love it. I just, there are so many times where I'm messing with HTML code, trying to learn something, whatever it is, I'm trying to learn something new, but I've got Twitch over here going or something else, but then you're trying to manage windows back and forth. And as I understand it, this stays up no matter what's going on on the screen. I think it's just genius. So many uses.
It's just picture in picture, like a TV, like when you're browsing your channels, like a lot of TVs have that. Pro tip, multi-monitor. No.
Yeah.
I've got multi monitors, but I still
Not enough.
Yeah, not enough. I was trying to figure out how to extend my desk to get more on there. I don't think you can ever have enough monitors.
You need the rack mounts.
Do you guys use more than one or more than two? I mean, because I only have two. Two works great for me, but I don't know if I need a third one. Do I?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
You absolutely do. You can't have enough. My setup is basically a 30-inch in the center, and then I have two 24s up in portrait mode on each side. So they're like two horns up each side of my primary. And then you've got everything from, like, I find reading, like, documentation is really good on the portrait.
Right.
Because there's like less scrolling, and I don't know, you can just kind of get around everywhere. Even like, okay, the dirty secret about how much time we all probably spend on Telegram. That's a good one because you get all the different conversations that are in the go and your notifications. Like, yeah, you're only on two. Come on, man. Like, time to step up.
So,
Right.
I mean, there are instances though where you could see you can't have a multiple monitor setup. So if I'm, for instance, downstairs where some of my laptops are, I'm not going to have, when I'm in bed doing something, I'm not going to have that multiple monitor option. I would like to. My wife would kill me, but hang them from the ceiling. But, so I think that there's a lot of use for this. I think it's a really cool idea that's actually really useful. Like some of these things that I see are features that come out with certain apps. I'm like, it's neat, but I would never use it on a normal basis. I wouldn't train myself to get used to it, basically,
Right.
to execute. This is one where I could see I would train myself to use that on a regular basis.
A lot of them are edge cases, right? So
Yeah.
Yep.
it's probably someone built it because it solved a niche for them. So
It's true. Very true.
But then again, that's probably how a lot of software starts.
Yeah.
I really hate
problem.
how X works, so I'm going to build Y to get rid of X.
That's it. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about Gnome, because I think we've covered enough of it. There is a poll over at OMG Ubuntu asking what apps should be in Ubuntu by default, be installed. So they would all be available through the Software Center, but which one should be installed by default? And they have a listing of them, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I definitely say the Tweak Tool should be in there by default. But we'll put a link in the show notes that you can go over and vote, and that way you can give your feedback.
I think probably with that kind of stuff, the biggest consideration on my point of view, like if it's a selection of like, if it's like choosing which one audio player over the other one, you should probably, assuming they're functionally compatible or not functionally, like, kind of the same level of feature sets, then you should probably pick the one that integrates into your desktop better.
Right.
Like it, so that it feels like more of like a complete look, feel, like it feels like it belongs there, not that it's like kind of bubblegum and duct tape sort of added in after the fact. That's also assuming feature parity though. So
Yep.
I found it interesting. Tweak Tool is dominating the poll already in the results there, Rocco. So your recommendation is definitely.
You can't live without Tweak Tool, man. I'm sorry. If you're installing Gnome, you got to have that. All right, enough about Gnome. We got other distros to talk about.
Yeah, we got this MX16.1, and it's really, I love how their headline is released with support for Adobe Flash. So that
the world cheered.
Well, that's a little bit of a head scratcher to me. I don't entirely follow what the big sort of perk is with that. I mean, everyone's kind of got Flash, and I know that this one's like some approved by Adobe special use case, but I guess it's the fact that it's the official Adobe Flash that's included within their ISO. I guess that's really the big selling point.
I guess I'm out of touch, but I thought Adobe was killing their own product. I thought they were killing.
Well,
Flash.
That's the long-term plan, is kind of my understanding. You look at everything else they're doing and where they've moved to and changing their focus into HTML5 and building tools for that kind of stuff. I think it's around and it's there, but I think it's going away. So I just don't follow it entirely, but I guess the big deal is just the fact that Adobe let them package it in the ISO, but I'm not sure what's exactly headline worthy of that. I'm probably missing something,
we've had Dolphin Oracle on from MX16 before on Destination Linux, and part of the draw to MX16 is the fact that they have their own specific tools that they design and make. And one of them was
Solus.
yeah, exactly. And one of them was the MX Flash. So that was in there in the ISO before, and now it's no longer needed. So they'll be using, I guess, the official Adobe. So that's why I would assume that it's in there as far as a headline.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so I guess they've got their new release out here, and they've got some, I guess they've done some work on their installer that's supposed to be improved, has improved like home folder encryption, they're claiming it's experimental though. So there's the big caveat, you might want to be careful.
I don't think I've ever encrypted my home folder.
Really? My whole hard drive's encrypted.
Really?
Oh yeah. I run that by default.
Oh my gosh.
So
that seems like just in case I can't get to it again. You know what I mean? Like, just what happens if you forget your password?
It's called backups, which you should be doing anyways.
Well, I do that anyway, but I don't know. I just never. I never saw
as a password manager.
I've never saw the need or the draw to encrypt the home folder. I mean, is there something I'm missing?
Well, I mean, I guess that comes down to what are you storing on your computer, really? Right? Like, do you have anything on there? Do you have access into any sort of systems? Like, do you have anything saved in your browsers? Do you have, it's a vector. And I do it too, because like if it's stolen, for me personally, it's more about theft. I don't like that concept of somebody having my data, not because my data is particularly interesting or that I have something to hide. It's just, I just don't want that to happen. And the other thing is like hard drive failures, and you got to dispose of them. Like, now I don't have to go run a drill through the proverbial virtual platter now that they're all SSD, or smash it up or anything. Or if I want to swap my disks out and give it away to someone, well, guess what? I don't even have to write it to zeros. I don't have to do any of that. It's just, and you know what? Why not? In this day and age, why would you not do it?
It runs so well, has no performance impact any longer. It's not like it used to be where you had to be a programmer to figure out how to encrypt. And that's one thing I love about a lot of Linux distros is it's a checkbox. Click the checkbox, you're done. Yeah. It's encrypted. Like it's so simple. Even a caveman could do it. But I think people, to Dustin's point, forget about how much, or take for granted how much personal information, even if you think, well, I don't have any secret government documents or whatever, but you've probably downloaded bank statements. You've probably, if you've ever gone for a mortgage or anything, gotten all that paperwork e-filed to you. Maybe, you were doing some credit line. There's just so many things that you don't think about that you end up storing. And if somebody was to get their hands on that, you're talking social security numbers, dates of birth, maiden names for your mother. I mean, all that stuff's on those type of documents. Right. So
it's all there. But I mean, if you're smart anyways, if you're talking about security, your security questions don't reflect your mother's maiden name.
Right.
Don't do that.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's like, pro tip there, just choose a standard person, place, or thing that has nothing to do with you. And that way, anytime you have a security question that involves a place, the standard answer that has nothing to do with you. Anytime it's a question about a person's name, you have a standard name that has nothing to do with you. You know the answer. That's kind of the way I look at it, because then, like anyone with a little bit of Googling skill can go figure it out in like 15 minutes.
Or separate authenticator being the best option instead of the dumb questions like, what was your first car?
Right.
Maybe a past girlfriend that don't like me can guess that. So I'm not so sure that that's great security.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's the way I tend to look at that kind of stuff. Why not?
I'll have to look at it, because I've never done it, so maybe I'll have to look into it.
That, my friend, is, like he said, that checkbox and one extra login when you start your computer. So the only time I recommend against it is if you have remote reboots.
Right.
Now, you're not going to see that.
My question would be, how would that affect me as a distro hopper? And I install it multiple systems, and I keep the same hard drive. I keep the same folder partition. Does that carry over?
That's a good question. I cannot answer that, my friend. Time for separate hard drives.
See,
that's why I got files over to one hard drive once I'm doing that, and then I move them back once I change the distro over. But in your case, I'm not sure if you're keeping the exact same hard drive.
Well, the other thing I do is I have my test drive, and I will have 3 partitions on that, and I'll install different operating systems on that. But I will symlink to my main home partition. Will the encryption not allow that to happen?
Well, not if you're reaching into another drive that is encrypted. Now, if you have your installation drive encrypted, right? Say you've restricted it to a partition. It depends probably on the installer. If your home folder is not encrypted somewhere else, it's not going to care.
Right.
It's going to be spun up and it's going to reach over. Going the other way, I'm not too sure. I haven't tested it, to be honest.
Something to look into. All right. What else we got with MX16?
Yeah, sorry, got very off topic there.
No, it's all good.
So it looks like they've updated, kind of their default themes and sort of some of the wallpapers. They've got options for top or bottom placement or horizontal bars, and sorry, that's in their MX default look. And I guess they've improved backup and restore. I'm not entirely sure what that encompasses, but I guess you get better backups, which is always a good thing. They've updated their manual in HTML and PDF, so I guess they're keeping their documentation current, which is always going to be good. They did a bunch of bug fixes in like app notifier, right click menu improvements, icons, themes, preferences, classic versus like their MX16 stuff. They've got I guess they got a new ISO hosting over on SourceForge, and it's based on, what was it, Jesse 8.8 or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I just did a video on MX16 the day before this patch came out, which is my luck. So they patched some of this, but I was really, and a lot of people I had read when I was trying to find a fix for this ran into this, which is no NVMe support in the installer, the problem that I ran into. And this was particularly a big issue, and I know a lot of computers now are coming with that NVMe support. And I wasn't the only one having the issue, so I know it wasn't just because I'm so inexperienced. Maybe others have found a solution. There was one person on a forum who'd created some package to work around it. But I was really hoping to see that here, or if somebody knows, a solution to that, I would love to know if that's still a problem or if it was just something with my setup. But it would see it in gparted. It would see my NVMe drive, but would not in the installer. But I loved MX16. I thought it was a really great, beautifully simple distribution. I really liked it. That was the one issue that I had and why I couldn't use it as a main distro, because my main drive is the NVMe.
So I haven't actually used it. What's kind of like the elevator pitch on that distro? Like what's sort of their niche?
Well, it's a lightweight, fast desktop, but it comes out in all of the tools that they have. So they have all kinds, the MX tools is basically what it is. And there's all kinds of different ones that they personally make for MX16, like the MX Flash that they had put into it. All kinds of different things in that. The MX default look, all kinds of different tools that they personally made, and that's where it was all geared towards people who may not be familiar with Linux. An easy way to do this. You can do this like by editing this file and doing this, but this tool does it automatically, and that's what the draw was.
If somebody doesn't ever want to touch a terminal, that MX16 is it. Like you don't have to touch it. Now I love the terminal actually in any aptitude, Debian based system, and it's Debian based, so it's familiar to me as a newer user. Those are the first commands that I used, and so I'm much more familiar with them and finding software and downloading software. So I don't need GUIs for that, but I definitely see the appeal. I love how it's simple. It gamed very well, and it had a very good performance and feel to it. I thought it was just a very well laid out system overall. It was definitely one where I would consider making it a main distro that I would utilize on a regular basis, but couldn't quite surpass Manjaro because the NVMe support by itself. So
interesting.
All right. So have any of you guys tried Cinnamon before?
I could say yes, but I would not be a very truthful gentleman then.
Ryan?
I think I did, but it's just the thought. Like I think it was something that I had tried when I was downloading it, but I couldn't tell you much about it outside of that. So I think at some point I clicked on it because it looked interesting.
Okay, I can't say I've never tried cinnamon or like mint, but it was so long ago that I can't even honestly answer when that was. I know I've seen it. I know they use green and gray. At some point they did, or maybe that'll tell us when it happened, but it hasn't been in a while.
Well, they've come out with a lot. They've been around for a while, and they've come out with the beta release for 18.2. So a lot of improvements have been made since those early days. That that was one of the first distributions that I started on. So there's been a lot of improvements since then. But Cinnamon is something that I ran when I started. I started out on KDE, and then I actually in between tried Cinnamon, and Cinnamon was really, it was that happy medium between having a really customizable desktop, yet not so customizable that you got lost everywhere. And sometimes in KDE you can get lost, and in Cinnamon it was like you had the settings area is, we talked about sane defaults before. Well, the settings area is very sane as far as your mind is concerned, where you can just get to what you need to, switch it, has a lot of customized options, but it's not going to blow your mind with it. And the Cinnamon 3.4 will be in the beta, and it will be in 18.2 when it's finally released. And one of the big things about Cinnamon before was the stability. So it was always, and that's why I switched away from it, because it was always good to use. But when you started adding applets or extensions, you would crash the desktop. And it was a constant scenario where you were constantly, they would update Cinnamon, the extensions wouldn't, or the applets wouldn't work, or they would crash. And it was just a constant fight with it. And with 3.4, they are having separate processes for different areas. So the desktop runs on a separate process, Nemo runs on separate processes, and it allows for you, almost like the Chromium idea, where each tab or each process is a separate one, so that if one crashes, you don't crash the whole desktop.
Okay.
So what I had to go back and check was that they've been on Cinnamon Mint as since 17, because Linux Mint 17 is what I used during 30 days of Linux. And indeed, they were on Cinnamon. So, and looking at the screenshots of Cinnamon, I definitely used it. The issue I had with Cinnamon was the tear through with OBS. That was actually the only problem I had on my main machines, what I used it on. So latest hardware, Intel i7 6700 with the GeForce 1080, and it ran beautifully, and it gamed very well. For some reason, something with OBS would, when you were recording, the screen would constantly tear through on OBS, and I could not get around it. I could go into any other distro and desktop environment and not have that problem. With Mint, it was constant, and that was why I went away from it, because it was one of my top picks for new Linux users, because I just thought it was gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful and very easy to use.
I'm trying to remember if I had issues with screen tearing with Cinnamon or not, but I haven't used the Linux Mint Cinnamon for a while. It's been a few years since I've used Linux Mint Cinnamon. I have installed Cinnamon in other places, like through Arch, or I actually have, I am still on Ubuntu Unity as far as the base was concerned. I installed Gnome and Cinnamon alongside of it. So I have it installed on this system, but I don't remember if it has any screen tearing issues or not. But
well, the other thing is when you're installing it, though, you may be introducing other factors when you're layering it in over top of a distro that was not sort of built for it. So
I live on the edge, dude.
Need to grow your hair out so it flows as you're rolling that fast.
Yeah.
Well, you also, and then it may seem like small minor changes, but these are all changes that go into making a complete operating system. So you can change the desktop icon sizes with a click of a button. The desktop icons are now handled in their own separate processes. So they're not handled through Nemo. So it just all around seems to be that 3.4, and I'm, like I said, I'm running the 3.4 now. It seems like it's way more stable than previous versions. So I can't wait for it to hit Linux Mint and to see how stable that was, or that is, I should say.
Right. Well, if it's getting more stable, then they're doing something right.
Well, they're also improving the cinnamon spices, and we had touched on it on another episode of Destination Linux, but I figure we'll touch on it again because it is the beta release of it. So the website has been rewritten, and the goal is to not just make it look better, but have it be more secure and more stable. So before, like I said, the applets were part of the biggest problem with Cinnamon, that they would crash. So they're kind of locking down the control of the applets so that they kind of vet them a little bit. And it's not just an applet out there that they have no idea what that does, who knows what, to the desktop itself. So they are supporting authentication for the website through Google, Facebook, and GitHub. So you can comment and favorite your spices that you like. And they've moved the maintenance of the spices over to GitHub. So every change will be reviewed by Linux Mint. And it just seems to be, and I know that this has caused a lot of issues with developers because they feel that it's not going to be theirs anymore. Because like you make an applet and you put it upstream, and if they feel that that's not supposed to do this, they might change it. So it's almost like it's not yours anymore. But I think in the overall scheme, I think it works out better for the users.
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at it from the point of view of like even, a code review, I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. I guess one might argue though that you're getting closer to that, that proverbial walled garden if they're going to start, kicking things out because of specific features or functionality or something like that. But my understanding, at least from what you've said, is it's more about a review for stability, not necessarily functionality.
Right. Well, but that's part of what Linux Mint is about, almost with the walled garden, especially with their update system that they have, so that you only update like the security fixes. Well, you have your choice, but by default, you only update the ones that they say will, will work. Yeah, pretty much. So they're going to be directly involved in the maintenance of all the spices, and they're trying to get closer to a situation where everything just works out of the box. And that is whether you like Linux Mint or not, because I know there's a lot of people that don't like Linux Mint as well. But whether you like that or not, I think the goal is a good one. We all have different ways of going about things. We all have different viewpoints of how to get to our goals, but I think the goal in general is a pretty good one.
Sounds like it.
All right. So we have, Linux Mint also will have the Mate version in the beta release as well. The only major enhancement to that is the version of Mate, which is 1.18, and that's the one that supports GTK3. So, or is all GTK3?
Yeah, that's the one where everything's now finally merged over. I think that was because I know like Martin's on the Mate desktop team itself, like outside of his flavor distro thing. And I think that was something he was pushing pretty hard for.
Yep.
So.
All right. We got more news, dude.
Yeah. Oh, what do you know? KDE.
We always cover KDE every time, every show. And that's because they continually have this roadmap for updating, and it just never ends. So they have 5.10 just a week after they announced 5.10. They have 5.10.1, and on June 13th will be 5.10.2. And then on and on. 0.3 will be June 27th. 0.4 will be July 18th. And 0.5 will be August 22nd. And these are all bug fix versions. So 5.10 came out with all the feature set, but these are all the bug fixes to make it more and more stable. So are you guys KDE fans?
I like it, actually. I have no problem with it. I'm a huge fan of the configurability of it. And that stems back to me where like I'm a keyboard driver. So one of my favorite aspects to it is you can pretty much throw a keyboard shortcut on anything you could ever imagine in there if you can find it.
Right.
But it's in there, and I became more of a fan of it once they sort of got out of the old style theming that they had going on there for a long time. Like, it was a really solid functional wise, but I couldn't stand to look at it, which is kind of a stupid reason to like kind of shy away from something, because it had technical merit and still does. And I'd say kind of the direction they've gone and how, from a lot of the news I've been reading, things are sort of stabilizing and have been for quite a while. And now they're just kind of on this steady stream of just constant sort of like pushing out, feature sets and bug fixes. And it's not the sort of thing where you used to historically hear about the bugs and therefore, don't run it,
right.
Like at the beginning of the current series, the 5 series. But now it's like you pretty much hear nothing but good stuff about it. And when you get that sort of flexibility in there, like it's compelling. It definitely is, like, because you can make it do whatever you want it to do without having to crack too many, extensions or extras or go hunt for something that adds that functionality. It's in there probably. So
most definitely it's in there somewhere. You may have to search around for it, but it's in there.
Maybe I just need a good index search.
Yep.
It's my favorite desktop environment right now. I run in Manjaro is the KDE Plasma, and I love the ability to not only add widgets, add panels, change things like Dustin said around and configure it any way I want, but there's a lot of usability functions like the springing folder options that are in there now, where if I'm basically grab a folder, I drag it to the corner of another folder, it starts opening all the folders underneath so that I can move my files through there. And there's just so much that from a productivity standpoint, I think that it handles so incredibly well.
I'm actually surprised no one did that feature before now, because I genuinely wonder if everyone was trying to give some distance from when like Apple rolled it out, because they've had it for a couple of years in their stuff. And I'm really surprised no one copied it, because it's a great way to navigate through those folders when you got to get through a hierarchy a little bit deep, because sometimes you just definitely don't want to pop up a file browser and knock down into your hierarchy that way. It's a kind of a pain. So it's a great idea. I hope it comes to more of the desktops and more of the file browsers.
Agreed.
Well, you mentioned KDE Manjaro, and that's my nemesis. That's the one.
Really?
I have yet to get installed on my system, so
oh my god,
I'm gonna get
it.
One of these days, I'm gonna get it installed.
How does the noob like it, and the guy who actually knows what he's doing doesn't like it?
I can't even get it installed. I liked it. I had it. I can boot into a live USB disk, but I can't get it installed on my system. That's my problem.
There is a trick that I've had to do, and I will say it's probably one of the worst installers, my personal opinion. As a new person, it's a very difficult installer. And I know it's supposed to be a simplified installer for Arch, so how do you think that makes me feel? But for some reason, if I go into that first splash screen and I choose non-free software
Yep.
instead of free software, and then I do boot from the USB, it will work. If I do not choose non-free, it will give me a kernel crash.
Right.
Don't know why.
Maybe that's a hint.
Well,
Yeah.
it has something to do with the NVIDIA drivers, and I have to do the same. But even after booting into it, the Calamares installer crashes. I've tried to install it through Thus, and that crashes. I've covered it a couple times where I just can't get it installed, but I'm going to get it someday.
It is your nemesis.
It is my nemesis.
I'm just going to take videos of my desktop and send them to you. Like, look how fun it is.
Yeah, right.
You'll never experience
Thanks,
it.
man. I appreciate it.
So here's the challenge. You got to borrow someone else's rig and go through the installer and see if you can get it installed on another machine. Then we can figure out whether it's you or the hardware.
That's the problem with only having one machine.
You've been clicking next the wrong way the whole time.
The whole time I've been doing it wrong, dude. All right. So the last thing about KDE is Kubuntu. If you enable the Zesty backports, has the 5.10.1 in it. So that's, if you're running Kubuntu, I mean, I always want to be on the latest one. And with Kubuntu, you're usually running a version behind or two. So yeah. I myself, if I'm running a Kubuntu desktop, will enable the backports and get the newest one. So,
or you just go Neon.
or you can go neon, bare metal.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's all we're going to cover on the desktop area. So what else did we got, Dustin?
There was, what were we going to talk about? So I saw OMG Ubuntu today had this article on that Ubuntu. I don't know if I'm saying that. I'm probably butchering it, which is basically, I don't know, I almost equate it to sort of like another hybrid of like a tweak tool, and yet also kind of like the welcome screen and getting some other software in there installed a little easier. I threw it on a test box today just because I was curious about it, and like they even say it's still under development, but it's still it needs some work, and you can kind of see that. But that they said that outright. So you can do some of that stuff like adding PPAs for third-party software, and like I said, it reminds me of a welcome. But you may want to kind of I noticed it was really asking for a lot of credentials and things like that. Like I don't know why it seemed like it wasn't sort of like when you enter sudo credentials and it sort of caches it.
Yeah,
it seemed like every single one. So there's probably something back there. But so it's a lot of that stuff. And then there was one, like some of the rough edges. Like one of the things I noticed is, so if they have a section where you can go through and do like package repairs, fixing your PPAs, purging and things like that. So you go in and you hit the button, but then it wouldn't work because it has a dependency on the y-ppa-manager application, which you can install through their little software selection aspect, and you would have it, but there's sort of no like dependency solving happening there. So I was sitting there like trying to hit the button, and then it pops like a terminal over on the side. And of course, I wasn't paying attention like I should have been because, I had 3 monitors. One was over on the side.
That's the downside to having 3 monitors.
Yeah, well, you hold on to that. And so I didn't notice that. And it's because it didn't have the proper tool sets. And then the other thing I noticed is it installs apt-fast, which is like it's like a shell wrapper around like apt or aptitude or whichever one you can tell it which one to use. And that's just so it can do like concurrent downloads and installations, like sort of side by side. So it's supposed to speed up the whole process because they have it was like 3 pages of software that you could sort of select, and of course they have the button that says select all, which I don't know why anyone would ever do.
Well, let me ask you a question. The app fast, I've heard about it before, read articles about it, but in a real world scenario, does it actually speed up anything?
Only when you're installing like a mass, like a ton of software, kind of like this tool is, because you're selecting, like hypothetically, if you do the select all, like you've got like 50, 60 packages, right?
Right.
And maybe then it would, but like would I go install app fast on its own? Probably not.
Right.
I don't really see a reason. Maybe I just haven't played enough with it. The biggest thing I like about it was the shell completion that you can add to it. So you just sort of get all your command switches and things like that. But I mean, you can do that anyways in a bash terminal with like bash IT or something, similar. So it's cool. It's kind of something to watch. It would make some things easier, but there's also a lot of like real dangerous things in there.
Well, I noticed that it has the enable sudo without password. This is not for a new user to put on and install and try out, because
what are you talking about? Now everything's easy. Now I can get to all those folders.
Oh my gosh. I don't think I would recommend this to a new user, but I don't know why you would need that. Why would you need to enable sudo without a password?
Because you're too lazy to type your password again.
But okay, again, why would I need that?
Because you're too lazy to type your password again.
Just don't want to type a password.
Right, I guess. I mean,
that's that comes down to. Well, honestly, I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, other than you have to enter your password again, legitimately, that's it. And the other thing with sudo is usually after you enter it once, and if you do a couple of sequential sudo commands, like it doesn't prompt you every single time. It remembers it for a duration and then it goes away. So honestly, I don't know. It's something I would never really enable. It's okay. It's convenient, but it's not that hard to enter your password, and the repercussions otherwise are much larger. So I don't know. I agree. This isn't something I would hand over to any new user. Maybe once they sort of refine it and sort of figure out kind of where they're going. Like, I don't really understand what the direction of it is. Like, the most useful thing I see in there is the mass amount of software selection. If you had, specific offerings in there, but then that's on a lot of the Ubuntu's, that's already being serviced by the welcome screens that everyone's forked off of Martin's original project. So why do you need this one? I'm not entirely sure yet, but it's still in dev. So, it remains to be seen. Maybe it's going to turn into something great, but right now it's just pretty early and a little dangerous, I would say, but not, dangerous to a new user who doesn't maybe understand what the repercussions are and, slams in. I don't need, like, if you did select all the package selections, I wonder how many PPAs that would put in.
Right. It does say Ubuntu power users in the title, so that's what it's aimed at.
Right, but I would also argue that half of those guys are going to go, like, if they really are, those power users really going to go disable passwords on sudo? And if they really want to, do you think they're not just going to run, like, go edit the sudoers file? Like,
well, I was going to say that, like, the users that this is aimed at probably aren't going to use a GUI at all. They're going to use the command line to do what they need to do. So I don't know. Yeah. Well, it remains to be seen. It's definitely nice to have it out there, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not trying to discredit whatever it is they're trying to do. It just sort of remains to see sort of how their direction settles out and whether it's going to be something that people are going to see as a value or kind of just a very narrow field of use. Who knows? Can't really say. Other than that, I would say, so we got some new Chrome happening here, which everyone seems to love. Seems to be the one that's kind of pounding Firefox into the dirt right now.
It is pounding them into the dirt, I have to say.
Well, it's pounding everyone into the dirt. So there's not a whole lot you can do. So they just had 59 come out, and if you read through the articles about it, they talk about a bunch of the updates that they've got for other operating systems like Mac notifications, but we're not really interested in that. But,
right.
So apparently they've got like 30 some bug fixes, and they've got some new little features like to avoid overprompting users. They will put kind of a stop on like an origin from requesting additional permissions after like the third dismissal of that permission. So it's not just going to sit there and kind of try to bludgeon you with like that pop-up left, right, and center in your face.
Right.
There's some of the traditional cosmetic stuff. Like I think the settings pane has a material design.
Yes,
you like it or you love it or you hate it. Whatever your theory is on material design, it's their invention. They're going to do it. I'm surprised they haven't done more of it in the browser itself. They've done some updates to things like the image capture API, which allows like a higher resolution, gives some additional access to the like developers where they can get more of like a full control over the camera settings, zoom, ISO, and white balances and things like that. So some people may debate whether you want people having more control over your camera or whether they want to, pull one of those.
Right.
And it a lot of the updates seems to be very developer related. It's like VTouch events, and there's like a new like worker. What do they call it? The worker-SRC, worker source, however you pronounce it. It's like a content security policy directive, and there's like a V installed related apps function, which consolidates like push notifications in a more intelligent way. It's that kind of stuff. So I would say it's more developer driven, but if you really like material design and want your settings to look good, then you've got that option.
Well, I have to say that settings look better than they did before. That's just me. I'm not saying that I love material design, but I think it definitely is an improvement over what they had. So do you guys use Chrome?
Yes. Well, okay. I use Chrome, but recently I've actually gone to Vivaldi.
I love Vivaldi.
Because it is like the biggest thing for me in Chrome, and why I kept coming back to it. Originally you'd have things like Netflix playback, but it was a lot of the extensions, just the things used. But the fact that I can go to the Chrome store in Vivaldi and load up all my extensions, oh great, checkbox. Probably my biggest hate is a very strong word. Dislike of Vivaldi is the fact that it doesn't have the settings sync yet. I know people have been asking that for a while. So you got to kind of remember, sort of, what extensions you had and, and your
That's a
You
big
distro
thing.
hop a lot, Rocco.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll tell you the sync is really good for somebody that would distro hop. I'm just saying.
Exactly. So but I do use it. It's still like, I come and go with Vivaldi. So if I leave Vivaldi, I'm always back at Chrome, I guess, to answer your question. So Chrome's always on my system regardless. And sometimes I just use Vivaldi as I keep dipping my toes back in to see if they have sync, and then maybe I can go there,
Right.
because it does everything I need it to do and more, actually. So
I did a video back when I was doing security, so a lot of security stuff, and that's where Vivaldi first came up. Actually, a user said you need to check out Vivaldi, and I did a comparison between Vivaldi, Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and also ran a bunch of programs to look at the security and ways that you could get around. Vivaldi ended up being one of the best out there, not only from a system resource standpoint usage, but also its security, not having the vulnerabilities that both Chrome and Firefox had. So I'm Vivaldi Firefox all the way. I try to stay away from Chrome as much as possible, especially when Firefox had the ability to play, as Dustin said, Netflix and Amazon videos, because that was the only thing that was holding me there was that. And you could install Chrome and you could play that right away. But now that that's gone and you can do that in Firefox, what's the point of going into Chrome? Because I know that Google is out there grabbing as much metadata as they can on everything I'm searching for, everything I'm doing. To me, it's counterintuitive to the whole, I'm on Linux, I like privacy, I use Chrome. Well, you're probably not getting that privacy you're hoping for if you're using Chrome. And if you're using Google search instead of DuckDuckGo, you probably don't care about privacy as much as you might think either.
The other thing too is if you're using Chrome or even Vivaldi, I highly recommend you put on the Great Suspender extension. And
have it installed.
That thing is so good. That basically keeps Chrome from eating my machine. Otherwise Chrome would just devour it. And when I found that one quite a while ago, that one goes with me everywhere now.
Well, the sync option is definitely the best thing about it. Whether it's Chromium or Chrome, it doesn't really matter to me. The only problem that I have with Chromium is sometimes it doesn't display sites as well as Chrome for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Really?
I mean, it seems it's the same underlying code, but it's just there's certain sites out there that won't display properly in Chromium. They will display properly in Chrome. So I don't know.
That's weird.
All right, so let's move on to SteamOS, and that release is a new release with the Linux kernel 4.11 and a new Mesa graphics stack. So I don't run SteamOS. I know Rob runs. Do you run SteamOS, Ryan?
No, never.
I'm just glad they're still building it, because that just shows a little bit of dedication from Valve still, because a lot of people were worried that it was kind of starting to get, a little dusty. No one had blown the cobwebs off. There wasn't a lot of movement on it. So, it shows something regardless
And
of
I
what
believe
it is.
Steam Link, I don't know if I'd have to look up, but I think Steam Link runs straight SteamOS. And in that case, I've played with it from a Steam Link standpoint.
Right.
And Steam Link works fantastically with Linux, by the way. With Steam Link's a little box that you can put next to your TV, and you can stream games from your computer to that box and play them through there. And it runs fantastically from a Linux implementation. And just anything Steam's doing right now, they're really building the whole Linux gaming foundation. They're pushing it better than anybody out there. So I'm just a huge supporter of them. If it wasn't for them, the gaming in Linux wouldn't be nowhere near where it is today. And so I'm very happy that, like Dustin said, that they're still supporting their OS. And I hope it does find success. I've never gotten into it from the standpoint that my understanding is it literally is a gaming platform. There is no ability to really add other apps or things into it. No. So for me, that wouldn't be something that would be that exciting when I can just use Steam and go into big picture mode if I kind of want that experience where I'm all in and just gaming.
It's just meant to be an appliance, right? Like something that you would have out in your living room that you could go either load on some old hardware or something that you like the look of or something like that. It's meant to be an appliance, not so much like, it's Linux under the hood, but it's not meant to be a Linux, distro flavor or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Well, that's why I threw it in here into the news. It's not like like I said, I'm not running SteamOS and never have, but it seems like Valve is behind the whole push for the Linux gaming and other companies like Faro Interactive and stuff. But I just think that it's a good thing to see these companies behind them.
Well, they're driving the bus, really, is the way you look at it. Everyone else is kind of like passengers. Maybe some other people are, running Copilot if you want, if such a thing existed on a bus. But I'd say they're really the bus driver, if you think about it, or at least they're the ones that lit the fire on the barbecue. So
they're also heavily pushing the Vulkan drivers for these games and heavily vested into that. And that's so important because if you look at my channel and all the people's comments, one of the things you'll see is I would switch to Linux if it wasn't for the gaming. I've got a game and it's always gaming. Nobody ever says anything else. Stability, never an issue. Security, never an issue. Nothing. It's always just I would switch, but gaming. And so when you see these pushes coming in, especially Vulkan, and you think about who's going to go out, Microsoft probably is not going to just sit there and go, let's let DirectX, 11 and 12 just die
Right.
and go to Vulkan, even though NVIDIA and Intel and AMD are heavily vested in Vulkan right now, right? They're releasing their drivers for Vulkan. I believe NVIDIA released their Vulkan drivers the day Vulkan became available. So this has got to be fearful for Microsoft, right? Because they've had a monopoly with DirectX. So it's who's going to be able to compete against Microsoft, who has a bigger base than them? Steam, because all those people who said, I can't live without gaming on Linux, they can't, or, without having games, the games that I play, they can't live without Steam. Steam is the staple of essentially PC gaming right now. And there are other ones that are coming across. So it's so much more than just the importance of having Steam supported. It's the fact that there's such a in-house name, a tool that all of us use for gaming, and they're pushing it so heavily that makes it such a great thing.
it's name brand. It's name brand recognition.
There
really.
you go. That's a great way of putting it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of gaming, what do we got in the gaming section, Ryan?
Well, speaking of Vulkan and, Mesa, but Vulkan's included in there. You've got some 70 improvements have been released in the Mesa package. I'm not super knowledgeable in this area. My understanding is Mesa is kind of a wrapper for all of the OpenGL and APIs and Vulkan APIs. So they've put 70 fixes in there, and I think some of those 70 fixes directly impacted Vulkan and how it interacts with AMD cards. There are some fixes for that. So that was pretty interesting in there. I don't know if you guys have any additional insight into that.
Well,
You're talking to the guy who does not have a GPU, my friend.
Oh, that's right.
I'm afraid I do not have a lot of insight. Unless you want Minecraft Call of Duty Edition, then I'm
Wow.
beyond that.
Well, no, I don't want Minecraft Call of Duty Edition. I am not technical enough to know all the workings of Mesa or anything like that. But again, it's the same scenario where you see all these changes going, and little by little, the gaming community in Linux is growing and growing and growing. And it wouldn't be possible without all of these developments from Mesa and everything else. And we had talked last week about Faro Interactive, where they gave their whole Steam library to anybody who had made more than 5 commits to Mesa.
Wow.
And
That's cool.
I mean, that is just awesome. So it's all these little things, little here, it goes by and you say, oh, well, another Mesa update. But you know what? It's these things that happen that make everything where it is right now. So
This is the most exciting time when I look back in history for Linux in gaming. And I think finally, it's gotten to the point where the folks who are involved, the open source community, the groups that are creating games, they're all starting to take note, and they don't want to be wrapped into a single platform either. With Vulkan, you can release your distribution, your API much easier over multiple platforms like Android, the actual video game consoles, and PCs, and Linux, and Mac, all within that. Where there's OpenGL by itself, that was much more difficult. You had to create separate APIs for kind of each one, or coding for each one. So my understanding with Vulkan is that it's going to bring all that together. Now you can, develop that API and it's going to work cross-platform. So now why wouldn't a developer want to create their game and have that option, right? Because you'd say, well, as a developer, of course I'm going to hit the Windows community. That's the biggest. But Linux is growing fast, but it's still maybe 7-8% of the market as far as consumers go. But now I can have another 8% of the market. If I just code in Vulkan, of course I'm going to do that and implement it. This is the most exciting time for Linux and gaming ever. And all of those folks who were leaving those comments talking about I would switch if it wasn't for gaming, I really think in 6 months that's going to be a mute issue for the first time. I think we're at the point now where the game developers are going to start writing a lot more for Vulkan. You got to remember a game creation cycle is 5 to 10 years.
Right.
So some people are already in the middle of writing their games, installing. So you're really looking at this next group of games, which in the next 6 months, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more, and we're already starting to see a lot more. For instance, like Warhammer 40,000, right?
Yep.
That's a big name out there for a game. People love the Warhammer franchise. I mean, it's an obsession. It's out there with like a Star Trek or Star Wars. Warhammer is the same thing. This is a tabletop RPG that a lot of people played, fell in love with, painted the little figures. Now it's in a game environment. It's a fantastic thing to see big names like this now starting to create their games. You got Mad Max, of course. Doom's experimenting with one of the first games that came out with the Vulkan driver, which the second it did, I installed it in Linux and ran beautifully out there. So you've got big names now doing games. So Warhammer 40,000 is in the news because they have their release for Linux, Dawn of War 3. And they've got some pretty tough requirements on here for their PC that they've listed out. This isn't like a lot of some of the Linux games you look out there. It's like you have 1 gigabyte of RAM and half a processor. You can run our game. This one requires, I think they're talking about 3.4 gigahertz i3 or better, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you do have to have a GPU, Dustin. Sorry.
This leaves you out, Dustin.
You're out. Yeah, but even with those requirements, it sounds like I even have to update all my. I just basically need to buy a rocket ship at this point, or go to a console because I can't keep up. The one thing that I find actually interesting about all this graphics work and the driver work is I'm curious to see where it's going to go with application in like industrial design. Because as you get better performance, like rendering and things, and then you get into like the 3D sort of aspect in CAD and AutoCAD. And I know a lot of people are already doing that on Linux, but having more of like sort of this work going towards the driver stack in the graphic side of things, I think is really good there, because then you might actually start to see some of the larger companies that are working in that space might actually sort of sit up and take notice that things are stabilizing and getting more performant and being applied to where, it's not like Linux is sort of like, the third cousin in that arena anymore, And so this kind of work just touches back, and it's beyond like gaming's the application that's driving it, but it expands out more than that even.
Yep. Well, it goes back to before, going back to the gaming part of it. It was all about the money. Yeah, you're not going to have developers just make games for Linux. It has to be. It's almost like a steady flow of updates to the graphics drivers, updates to Mesa, updates to Vulkan. All of these things combined, slowly but surely, persuades people to say, okay, well, hey, one game starts working on Linux. Okay, well, we're going to make this game working on Linux, and we seem to be. As Ryan said, on a roll where it's like the best time for gaming right now, because it's just a snowball effect where more and more games will come out, more and more development will come out with the graphics. And again, going back to what you said, Dustin, it will also help with all of the industrial work you can maybe now switch, you can maybe have companies that would never consider running Linux, maybe would run Linux if they knew their software would work.
Well, and there is more of a market for it coming out. Like in my day job, we deal with a lot of like this exact kind of stuff, industrial design, but doing it over remote and with like remote GPUs and stuff in the cloud. And we have actually seen more demand for Linux agents coming out now. So originally the company I worked for started with like, you know, Windows agents, things like that. But we actually built a Linux graphics agent that you can run, you know, in the cloud and have remote desktops that are running GPU rendering. Like we have clients like Ferrari, Lamborghini, Pixar, Industrial Light and Magic, John Deere. Like they're all doing 3D applications remotely. But some of them are actually leveraging Linux and pushing us to actually manufacture it. So it's getting more mainstream in other industries, even like outside of like, it's unfortunate that those industries aren't like open source. Like that would be way better if it was, but it's still nice to see the adoption and the acceptance of the platform in other industries that traditionally they wouldn't touch it because they felt like it was either too much of a risk. It's not a serious contender. It's not really worth looking at in that, you know, historically is kind of the thought process they've had, but that's, you know, that's changed or changing and will continue to change.
I think what's also very exciting about this Warhammer announcement is that guess what you have to have if you're an Intel or AMD user and you want to run Vulkan is what we just talked about, which was the Mesa 17.1, 17.2, but they put Vulkan in there. Experimental Vulkan, Feral Interactive, put that in there. You're seeing more and more and more of these. Now, these are big companies now. These are no longer the small independent companies. These are big companies like the creator of Doom, right, that are going in and they're wanting their games to be ported in here. So they're experimenting, they're playing with Vulkan, they're using it, they're getting ready for implementations is what I'm hoping for, and we're going to see it more and more and more. Of course, Feral Interactive, they're doing, you know, amazing work helping push that, but they're getting through to big developers at this point, and that's such an amazing accomplishment right there for Linux.
It's definitely a good direction to be going into. So, all right. So there's any of you guys have anything else to cover? What do you got, Ryan?
Well, there's Clocky. Is that how you pronounce it? Clocky?
I guess it's Clocky.
I think it's Clocky. As everyone knows on my channel, I have a tendency to mispronounce many things. So Clocky, whatever it may be, is a beautiful casual puzzle game out there. So Rocco, this is right up your alley. You are not going to have to be quick with the mouse or the keyboard.
Wait. Dustin is the one without the GPU. Does it run without a GPU?
Oh, I can play this. Hold on. Let me install that right now.
I need to go look at the specs on there. But what I found interesting in watching the videos about this game is that this is a lot of people play these type of games on their phone, the puzzle games. And obviously, there's a big market for it. They're extremely popular. So now you're starting to see them in the desktop mode. It looks like a very simple puzzle game that you can play and have fun with and be something to go check out. More of a relaxing puzzle type game. There's not a lot of fast action going on or anything along those lines.
Right up my alley.
Yeah.
Right up my GPU.
yeah, your GPU. Although the box that you're moving around in this looks 3D, so I don't know, man.
Oh, great! I'm gonna get about 10 frames.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, guys, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I think we've went pretty long, but I totally enjoyed our conversation, and I want to thank you both for helping me co-host this because it was awesome.
No worries. Thanks for having us on. Now I can say that, right?
Now you can say that.
Oh, okay.
Well, Ryan, we're going to have you back on and just have another conversation. Dustin, you're going to be back next week?
That's the plan.
Next week with go ahead.
David Mohammed. He's the team lead of Ubuntu Budgies and possibly others. I got to figure that part out. Depends how many little chat heads you want in this video.
Right.
And so we're going to come back next week and you can dig in and bang us with some questions and see what kind of info you want.
Yep. Well, Rob will be back. So like
nice.
I said before, he just had some business arrangements to take care of, so he wasn't able to make it. But he will be back next week and we will have a discussion about Ubuntu Budgie.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
All right, guys, thanks again. And until next week, be safe and check you later.
Have a good one.